Welcome to the Continuer Podcast. This video podcast is a weekly study resource from Countryside Christian Church. We are glad you have chosen to join us today as we navigate God's direction for our lives.
Welcome back to another edition of the Continuer Podcast as we are, we're just coming out of Thanksgiving, and I don't know about you, but it was a rude awakening for me to look at the calendar the last few weeks and realize that, man, Christmas is just around the corner. We are already in the beginning of December, and Christmas is just a few weeks away. So we hope that you are prepared or getting prepared for that time that we celebrate the birth of Jesus. With that being said, in the midst of this series that we've been teaching through, we've entitled A Bigger Table. We've been looking at how do we create a bigger table, a larger space for in our lives for people, for us to have a relationship with people that we know and people that God's going to bring into our lives. Well, this is the time this season where it's natural to have tables get bigger, where the Leafs are put on the table. There's more people around to eat dinner, breakfast with, as family and friends gather, and we see that physically happening. But how do we do that even with a metaphor in our lives spiritually? And so today we're looking at this truth that Jesus teaches about, that of how it is that we create more intentional space. I found that in my life, the older I get, the thing I have to push back on the most is that not just to do things because I've done them, or I've done them I've done a certain activity or a certain task a certain way. Instead, be able to be more intentional about what I do as a husband, as a dad, as a pastor, as a leader, even just as being me, being a child of God. And so we see today that I want to give you like 4 words that you can run with, that I think are 2 sets of 2 words that you can run with that will be helpful, I think, to understand how to be more intentional in our lives. How do we be more intentional about creating a larger table, a bigger table for people in our lives? And the first 2 words I want to give you today as we kind of map through this is invite and invest. It seems as though that we get the invitation thing well many times as we create more space for more people. You invite them into your home for Christmas, for Thanksgiving. We intentionally go out on couples dates with friends, with our spouses, all these things, and we invite people in. But the question is, how do we invest well? Well, one of the principles we need to know is that the closer that we live in proximity with people, the greater opportunity we have to influence in their life. The same is true that the more time we spend with people, or the closer we get with people, the greater opportunity there's for them to influence our lives. And so in that, Jesus is one that, he demonstrates that and teaches it very well. Because in Mark chapter 5, there's this moment where Jesus, there's a religious leader Jesus overhears him talking about his concern for his child who was sick and nearing their deathbed. And Jesus, in no such words, says to him, like, hey, don't worry, like, we're going to take care of this. We're going to do this. And so he sets out to go to this man's home. But when they get to the home, out of all the disciples, Jesus allows just 3 of them to enter the home with him. And those guys were Peter, James, and John. See, there was this close-knit inner 3 that Jesus had out of all the disciples that he begins to invest in because he had invited them into relationship with him, and now he begins to invest in them even in a deeper level. But how he invests in them, I think, is very critical for us to understand, is that what he does for them is he tries to help them have a divine encounter. An encounter with the presence of God, the power of God, the movement of God in ways that they had maybe never seen up to this point, or at least maybe not to this level. And in that word divine, I think is important to know is that word really translated out is really the word beautiful. Is that he was hoping in wanting them to be a part of the healing of this religious leader's child in a beautiful way, a beautiful encounter with God. So I want to give you that encouragement today as you create space for people in your life. How do we become more intentional in that? We invite them in, but then we are intentional about the investment piece. We invest in their lives, and we invest in them by helping them and walking alongside them so that they will have a chance to have a beautiful encounter with God. You see, I know for many of you that is something that's more complicated than the invite. I get it. It's easy to invite them into a Christmas service and sit by them. It's easy to invite them into a dinner party and serve them. But the investment piece, we can't miss it. And in that investment, direct them to the encounter, the beautiful encounter, the divine encounter with God the Father. So we have invite and invest. And I think the other two word grouping I want to lay out there for you today is rethink and redirect. See, when we see this, that Jesus was so intentional about who he spent his time with and what he was helping, who he was helping them encounter in God the Father. And the same is true for us. If we're going to be intentional in all that we do, we have to continually reassess in our own lives where our heart's focus is. And then see, is our heart's focus in line with the will of God? Let me say that again. Is that if we're going to be intentional in inviting people in to create a bigger table in our lives, we have to assess, where is our heart at? What is the condition of our heart? And then is that heart's condition and focus lined up with the will of God? You see, in Matthew 6:21, it tells us this, is that we see these words. You probably heard it before, but for where what your treasure is, your heart will be also. I think we see that many times from when we've been taught or we read that a lot to do with monetary or physical things. That is true, but it's only a piece of it. Is that it seems as though in this season of life, especially in this holiday season, I hear a lot more people talking about their time that they treasure spending with family and friends than I did maybe the food that they ate at Thanksgiving or the gift they're hoping to get at Christmas. So therefore, where their treasure is in relationship and in family, which is good, which is beautiful, but that's where their heart will follow. You see, where our heart lands, our time will follow also. So where we find value in our lives, that's where our heart will make our heart beat. So when we rethink and redirect, I want to give you this encouragement to rethink your heart's position, rethink your heart's focus. If it's off, if it's not in line with the will of God, then I encourage you to redirect it. Maybe push back on what you've been taught about what is supposed to be important in life, but what you're learning is that's contrary to the will of God. Maybe that's in position, the position you're in, or the seeking out of authority, or maybe trying to be the boss of someone, or getting up to the top of the ladder in business. All the while that if it's done with the right heart, can be completely God honoring. But if the heart is wrong, then our focus is going to be wrong. And therefore, we're going to create issue in our life and other people's life, and the table shrinks. The table doesn't get bigger. The table gets smaller because it becomes more about us rather than about others. You see, Matthew 5:8 tells us, "Blessed is the pure in heart, for they will see God." See, there's a direct correlation we see in Scripture of when our heart needs to be pure and to be in and on focus with God for us to truly create a bigger table for people. So I want to give you a little challenge this week as we wrap up this podcast, is that I want you to think about it, that in the hustle and the bustle of the season, it's easy to lose focus, right? I mean, it's easy. But I want you to know that I think it's okay for us to say no to a few things. Say no to a few things in this holiday season so that we can actually help our heart and our family's heart's focus be correct, be centered on God. So I'm going to give you a challenge here today. I want you to look at your calendar this next week, and I want you to say no to one thing. Say no to one thing in the month of December. Not just this week, but throughout the month of December, say no to one thing. Not something that, you just don't want to do, but rather something that you go, man, if I was to say no to this, then I can say yes to something that matters more. If I say no to that meeting that really doesn't need to happen, I'll have more space to spend time with my wife. If I say no to this party that we're invited to that we really don't even know anyone there, I'll say no that I can say yes to a night at home with my family, watching a movie or taking them out to eat. I want to encourage you that in this season, as we try to create with intentionality a bigger table for the people around us, We need to make sure we're focusing. We need to make sure that we're focusing to rethink and redirect our minds, redirect our hearts. Also, be willing to invest in those that we invite in. I hope you have a great holiday season up to this point. I hope Thanksgiving's been good, and I hope Christmas is going to be well. I want to encourage you to look at your calendar, knock one thing off of it, and say no to something so you can say yes to something that matters more. Have a great week.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you have enjoyed this resource. If it has been a blessing to you, please like or share the podcast on your social media platforms as a way of blessing others. Also, if you desire to help support resources like this, you can give financially at www.ccctopeka.com/hub. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next week.